Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today, what we have here is one of my species orchid in the collection, and this one is Phalaenopsis bellina. This one is a very famous orchid species, known to probably almost all orchid hobbyists. If you're new to this orchid hobby, this is something you definitely want to give it a try at some point. So this video will look at its progression, leading up to the bloom, but then also a little bit about how I care for this orchid, and then we'll get into a little bit about the method I'm using to grow this orchid and some of the benefits of using the substrate, which is hydrocorn and manto clay, and now I'll get into some of the mix ratios. So this orchid bloomed last year, and this year around end of June 2019 it started to continue to put out a spike, and within about a month or so this orchid was ready to start blooming. And this orchid is fragrant and it has sequential blooming characteristics, but this one, last year's spike started to dry up about a month after the flower dropped, and this year the spike is slightly thicker and longer than last year, but I'm still not sure if this spike will continue to live on. And because I'm guessing the reason I'm thinking that this spike would drop after the bloom is finished, because this orchid is still relatively young even though it's already blooming, and a lot of the older plants that I have seen with sequential blooming, I'm talking about bellina, they are usually at least like 4 or 5 years old. This one, when I got it, it was a near blooming size plant, and this is at least 2 years ago. So last year it bloomed, this year it's blooming, but I feel this orchid is still relatively young. So I think I will have to give it another year or even maybe 2 to see if it will continue to keep this spike for the entire year until the next blooming cycle. This orchid receives only quarter strength, in other words 25% of the recommended dosage on the label. So relatively weak fertilizer every single week, except there's only 1 week in a given month, any given month, there will be 1 week where I only use water without fertilizer, just pure water to soak this orchid. Right now you see in the video the substrate or the media is a mixture. So it's a mixture of hydrocorn and manto clay pebbles. Hydrocorn is similar to leca, but hydrocorn is not perfectly round, so it can potentially be a matter of preference for some of you. Some of you like to see perfectly round pebbles throughout the cup. Personally, it doesn't bother me. Plus, I'm mixing the two, so there's always going to be inconsistency in terms of look and feel. So that doesn't bother me, but if it does, maybe leca beads would be something you want to try out first. And if you're new to this growing method, semi-hydroponic system, there in my channel mate page, there is a there are a couple of videos on there about this growing method, and the net of it is there would be a reservoir below the 2 drainage hole on the side that you just saw in the video here, and every time the idea is that you would allow water to remain in that reservoir to continue to provide moisture and water within the cup, whether it's through roots that are already inside the reservoir to absorb the water, or through water evaporation as well as water wicking between the pebbles. And for this orchid, it's really nice that it already has roots inside the reservoir, because that way it gives me more flexibility in deciding how much water I want to give this to this orchid. For example, for the time being, I have been only giving this orchid 1/4 cup of water, and that usually only fills up about 1/3 of the reservoir, but then that is good enough water for this orchid to complete a wet dry cycle within a week in my environment during the summertime, which is really ideal. So you don't always have to fill up the water up until the drainage hole, because that may take a little longer, too much longer for the wet dry cycle to complete. And if it's too much moisture for too long, some orchids may give you root rot problems. So for orchids with roots inside the reservoir area, I really like it, because like I said, it gives me much more flexibility when it comes to determining the amount of water I want to give to that orchid for a particular watering cycle, wet dry cycle. And because semi-hydro usually would require inorganic media, so it doesn't break down due to old age, or it doesn't break down over time. For moss and bark chips, because they're organic media, they're natural media, they break down over time. So one of the benefits for using this kind of inorganic media is that you don't have to worry about repotting just because the media is getting old. And then another benefit is, because it's inorganic, there are fewer bug problems for this kind of media. At least in my environment, I noticed that there's almost no bug problem. You may still have fungal and virus issues that you want to watch out for, but for bugs, they really stay away from orchids with potted in inorganic media for my environment. I do see sometimes bugs here and there for orchids that are potted in moss or bark chip in my environment, but for orchids in semi-hydro, I really don't see any bugs at all. So maybe I'm just getting lucky, maybe have been lucky, but that's my observation. So I see that being a benefit for using hydrocorn and manto clay, or inorganic media as a whole. Another benefit is, if you ever have to repot this orchid, you could recycle these inorganic media, because they don't break down, they don't go old, but they do need to be disinfected or cleaned up. So what I have always done is, for example, if an orchid died on me, or if I just decide that something is going on with the media, I don't like this media, I want to give it a refresh, I either boil it and then let it just cool down on its own and then drain it, or I can even use soapy solution or hydrogen peroxide solution to disinfect, and then boil it, and then you get to reuse these substrates. You don't, unlike bark chips and moss, once they're old, they have to go, you have to get new ones. But with these substrates, that you can recycle and keep reusing them, as long as you do a good job preparing them for reuse. I have done it many times, and so far all the orchids potted in reused, recycled hydrocorn or manto clay media, they're doing just fine. So that's another thing. I think in the long run, it's more cost effective to use materials that you can reuse and recycle versus buying everything brand new every time when things need to get replaced. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this bellina's performance this year. Let's see if it will keep the spike from this year, or it will die and grow another new spike next year. I'll keep you posted. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification.
I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!